What's up? I'm Robin and I make stuff, and today I'm using the art of Fredrik Sono from Sweden as inspiration for my painting. Fredrik's work is awesome and he uses really cool colors and it looks like it should be really easy. I always find myself second guessing the steps that I'm taking. So we're gonna go through it today and see if we can create some of what he does. Here's Fredrik. He does these landscapes, trees, silhouettes, some water reflection, fog, and I love the colors that he uses. I love the layering that he gets. I love his technique for trees. This one in particular is the one that I am drawn to most. We've got some trees, we've got some cool sky colors going on, we have fog, and we also have some reflection. Huge shout out to Fredrik for being awesome and painting amazing stuff that I felt inspired. I'm gonna pass that on to my students here, and I'm gonna pass it on to you. If you like what you see here today, definitely give me a like and a subscribe. I appreciate your support. If you turn the notifications on, YouTube will be like, hey, Robin's making more stuff, check it out. Let's just get into it. Start like I usually do, but this time I'm gonna tape my paper to the book so I have a nice cleaned off edge. This is just gonna be a color study. I just wanna lightly sketch in where I want this background layer to go, where I want these two islands to go, and I will loosely put the trees in there. I don't feel like I need to draw those in. I just wanna know where the basic shapes are. We're gonna start out with what I think he did, which is wet on wet with a real dark gray here and then putting in some orange. I can see some of that orange down in here, which is really nice. And then also maybe some gray down here at the bottom. And then he kind of comes in with more paint at the end to kind of layer that in a little bit more because he goes around these rocks. You know, maybe if it were me doing it, I would put a little bit of orange down here so that color of the sky reflects in. So let's try that because we want to have this reflected. Wetting this. And I've noticed that this Hahnemühle paper doesn't hold the water quite like my Arches paper does. It sits on top, which I have to kind of get used to. It also seems to dry really quickly, which I'm also not used to. But again, kind of just doing some quick color studies. So I've got that in here. Now for my gray, I'm just gonna take some ultramarine blue. I kind of have some gray going on over here, but my go-to is always ultramarine blue and then some burnt sienna in there. And that's gonna create a nice kind of bluish gray. And then we're just gonna kind of put this in here. He's got it real dark at the top up there. I'm gonna tilt it just a little bit and see if I can get some gravity to help me out here. Gray down here at the bottom. And we'll go to about midway. So kind of just a graded wash of that gray down there. Real dark in this bottom corner. So then we're gonna get some orange. I'm gonna clean my brush out. I'm gonna put this roll of tape underneath my board just a little bit and see if I can get that to just kind of elevate on its own. Got this orange in here. I don't know what kind of orange he's using, and it might be, I need a little bit more red in my orange. Let's see what happens in here. And I'm gonna bring this down. I'm gonna wash my brush out just so I can move this color around a little bit. I'd be really interested to see how he actually does this in terms of the steps that he takes. So maybe I'll go this way with it. This Hahnemühle paper just doesn't bleed out the same way. I'll put some of that orange down in there as well. I put that there so you can kind of see where I'm going with this. So far, I mean, I kind of like what's going on here. We did that while it was really wet. Now I'm waiting for it to dry. So what's gonna happen now is we've got this in here, we've got that in here. I'm not super worried about these stars. The way you would do that potentially, I'm assuming how he did it, he got some white gouache and just kind of flicked it on there at the end. If that's something you want to do, great. The next thing I would do is we're going to put this back layer in here. He's got a couple of different layers, right? So he's got this lighter color and then he's got this darker color. So lighter, we're going to put that on first and kind of do some little tiny jabs of trees back there. It looks to me like maybe while that was all wet down there, he got a couple of darker ones and did some darker tree squiggles and dropped that into here while it was wet. So we'll get our paper wet and do these lighter trees. And then while it's still wet, we'll do darker over top and let those kind of bleed in. And then we let it dry. And then we do these darker ones. I'm going to hit this with the blow dryer. It has to be dry. If it's not dry, then we're just going to be moving all of this around. And we don't want that to happen. And we want these trees that we're putting down to be nice and crisp in those branches. Okay, so let's dry it. Dry. Because this paper dries pretty quick, I'm actually gonna make sure I know what color I'm using over here. That's about the color that he's using, and it's gonna dry a little bit lighter. I'm gonna clean my brush off. We're wetting this. Okay, so we've got this color, and we're gonna come in because we want it to be jaggedy a little bit, but also like really crisp. So see where it's hitting that water and kind of going down. That's exactly what I want it to do. Just a few little ideas of some trees in here. And he's got some big trees in the back. I don't know if you can see that, but I'm gonna put those in here just so those feel a little bit closer. And I'm just kind of going back and forth just to give the idea of trees. And he does his in a really interesting and cool way. I don't know exactly how he does that. We can give it a try. Let's see. So he takes a big long trunk and then he kind of goes out with his branches and then down and out and down. Some of them kind of go up a little bit. You can develop whatever technique you want to use for trees. I'm gonna go in here a little quicker because I don't want this water down here to dry. Then while that water's still wet, he's going in with darker color over top. Not super dark, but dark enough. He's got a couple little dark trees and those are going down like that. Perfect. And then this is going down. It's going down like that. He's got one over kind of in here. And this paper doesn't bleed out the same as Arches paper. Just adding a little bit of water. It's got this bend in the paper right here, so everything's kind of going into the center. And it's granulating in here, so it's kind of creating a little bit of funky texture in there. I'm going to use my paper towel to kind of just move some of this around. And now if you're like tapping with your finger in here, you're going to create some spots. So I try to move it with just the paper towel, creating some really funky stuff in here. I don't know if you can see that, but you can see that it's like granulating in there like it did in the sky, which is kind of cool. I mean, that's okay. If I want to come and put some darker trees in here, it has to be a little more dry. So you get those really nice edges. That means that what he's putting it on top of is already dry. So we have to let that dry just a little bit. Now I'm noticing as I'm looking at these, he's got just some little sticks, you know, little lines. He's got that up in there too, which also is really nice. Take this brush and come in here and just get a little bit of color and just do a little tiny bit, some tiny little details. And I think this paper is much smaller surface than what he's maybe working on. I can put some of these little tiny details in here now. Okay, so the next thing we're gonna do, very similar to what we just did, we're gonna get our paper wet again, and this time, because this layer is now dry, we can come back over it. Like this tree right here is sitting on top of that back light gray layer. But these dark ones are sitting on top of those. So those aren't till the very, very end. But you do have some of that fog showing through behind these, which is why these work really well, because it sets them apart and pulls them to the front because there's a lighter area behind them. So we're gonna get the paper wet again, and then we're gonna drop in some really dark trees. They're almost the same color as these, very, very close. And we'll do some of these guys as well back in here. And you can see down here, he's dropping that into something wet. So, you know, maybe we'll focus on this, and then we'll come in and we'll do these little island things here, the green, and then we'll come do those gray trees. Okay, so we're gonna do some more on this little half hill thing and let that dry and then kind of go from there. I'm gonna get my paper wet right in here again. I'm gonna use this brush for this, and I'm gonna get this kind of going with some dark. And then, that doesn't seem quite dark enough, does it? Here we go. It's not dark enough. That just means I probably have too much water in there. Some back in here. These are going to be potentially covered up just a little bit by the trees that kind of go in front of it, but we want these trees in the background to potentially show up. We don't want to paint them in afterwards. That would be too difficult. We're painting in layers, lightest to darkest. Okay, while we're letting that dry, we're going to come over here and do this little island section. I think he's mixing up a green and putting that in first. And then he's coming down with dark trees and letting the bottom of that kind of hit the top of this island thing and letting it kind of bleed into there. And then he's got this really dark one on top, right? Which brings it to the front more. So we're gonna go green here and just kind of put this in. Doesn't have to be perfect or anything like that, because we're gonna set it in better with some dark rocks and weeds and things like that. Kind of a muted, toned down green that doesn't have a lot of color in it. Undersea green is a good one. So we're gonna come in here and just kind of do a green little triangle island thing. Doesn't have to be a perfect triangle, but I just want to kind of fill that in with some green. And then while that's like that, we're gonna go in, because this is dry. We're waiting for this to dry, so this is dry. We're gonna come in with the same color we used for these and pull in some really tall trees. And we're gonna kind of come in with big, long, tall trunk of the tree. And let it hit that. And then he's got some tree branch stuff going on back in here. Maybe that's what yeah, that's what he does first. So forget that thing for now. We'll come back to that. And I'm letting that hit the top of this little island thing because that's what it looks like he does. So we're going to skip that tall tree that I drew in there first and do one right over to the right of that one. Oops, perfect. So we'll do one over, a little more over this way. And it's not as tall as that other one's going to be that we drew. Just kind of doing these sloped, they don't go up and they don't go straight down. They kind of curve. If you think about it holding the weight of all of these pine needles or whatever it is on there, they're gonna bend a little bit and give. So we're just kind of putting these in here. Little dots, little swoops, lots of little texture. You can put some branches that don't have any leaves on them. I mean to say pine needles. I live in the evergreen forest up here in Washington, and I can't stop calling them leaves. And they're not leaves. They're pine needles or whatever you call it. We'll just kind of put a bunch of stuff in here. We want it to hit this bottom just a little bit. Maybe we'll just kind of put some along the top of this thing and let it kind of do its thing. And if we do just a little bit of dark on top of some of these branches or pine needle sections, on just a few of them, then it will show that there are some that are on the back side of this trunk of this tree. You have a tree, and it's not just like a branch, a branch, a branch, a branch. There's branches coming out this way, and there's branches coming out that way, and branches behind, and there's pine needles kind of going all around it. So when you think about that, that's how you want to picture the tree, right? If you're looking down at it, it has branches going out this way, that way, this way, that way, not just over here and over here, over there, over there. How's this feeling over here? Hey, that's pretty dry. What we'll do now is we'll paint this little island, and then we'll start to put those trees in. So same concept. We've got green down here. He's got some really darks here, which I'm assuming he put on at the very end. Lots of little spots of what's back there showing through, and that's really important. So make sure you're doing that. Otherwise, it's just going to be this solid black or gray area, and things like that are what make this really believable. That's another reason why we don't want it to just look like a tree going like this, and then there's a branch and a branch and a branch and a branch and a branch, and they get a little bigger, a little bigger. You want it to feel like there's branches that kind of go around like this, and then maybe some that are like this, and maybe some that are like that. And you're kind of filling in, but also leaving all these gaps. So if you think about your tree trunk going straight up and down like this, and then you have branches, and there's branches going in the back, and then there's branches this way and branches that way and branches this way. If you can paint kind of in this motion where you're going up and down and getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, that becomes a little more believable than this. I'm going to do a branch like this, and there's going to be some stuff. A branch like this, and there's going to be some stuff. Branch like that, and then there's more stuff. And that just looks like, I don't know what that looks like, but it doesn't look like a tree. Think about that kind of crossing back and forth and back and forth and having a little bit of bend to your tree branch. We're going to paint our green in here. Get a little bit more of that color mixed. And you can kind of have fun with this. Like, what's the shape of that little section coming out? I think that looks great. We're going to let that go. I'm going to get a bunch of this mixed together because it's so hard to mix it with my tiny little brush. So I'm using my liner brush, and we've got a nice tall one in this white section. I'm not going to go into the gray, just going to kind of stay in the white so it really stands out. And just kind of come in here like this. It's got some little dots at the very, very top. I'm covering up those trees in the background, which is totally fine. If that starts happening, we planned it that way on purpose. We put those back there so that we wouldn't have to paint them later in the event that they didn't get covered up. Right? We want to paint from the background to the foreground, essentially. And we're kind of jumping around based off of what is dry and what's not dry. So don't be like, oh my gosh, I just painted over that really nice tree that I did back there. We were supposed to. Putting some of these branches in here, big sections of color, and I'm going to hit that top of that island right there, which is perfect. That's what I want to do. Leaving some of these little empty holes here. We want to do another really tall one next to it, and then we'll do a shorter one. I just draw this down. It's always hard using someone else's work for inspiration, I think to myself the whole time, gosh, if Frederick, that's this guy, if Frederick saw what I was doing, would he be like, oh no, that's not how you do that? Or would he be like, hey, that's really cool how you decided to do that. I didn't think about it like that, and you accomplished something similar. What would Frederick think? Knocked it out of the park. Good job. Or he could be like, how dare you copy my work? I personally, if it was me and I had people, painting what I paint, which is what I'm on here for on YouTube, so you guys can paint what I paint, I'd be like, look at these people. They liked my picture so much that they wanted to paint it. How would you feel? I'm interested to know if you would feel like this is awesome. Somebody liked my work so much they painted it, or would you be offended? Would you start drafting up some legal documents? Then we got this last little guy in the front as well. There's a couple little guys in there, but I'm just going to do the one because I kind of don't have a lot of room. You could always come in and do another one if you really wanted to. Behind it, a little bit lighter, which is kind of the direction this is going, but I'm just going to make sure it kind of hits down here on the top of this little island. This is dry over here, and that's exactly what we want to have happen. We're gonna paint this direction and see if we can get this to dry by the time we get over there, and if not, we'll just blow dry it. But he's got some rocks and things like that in the front. He's also got this really tall, dark tree that's really front and center, so we can put that one in as well. So let's do that really dark tree. Okay, paint, I need you to be really dark. Can you help me out here? And mostly it just needs to be full of paint versus water. So we'll say that that's pretty good. Oh yeah, that's great. So let's see how he paints these. He does a line like that and then kind of just swoops down with a bunch of brush strokes. And I think that's what works really well for him. That was nice and dark. He also has a couple little branchy things that come out here and there. I've never met a perfect tree. They're all kind of wonky. Okay, he's got some real wonky branches. Let's try some of those. I get so stuck in doing my normal routine of trees that it's fun to like, okay, how does that person do that? They almost remind me of trees in a swamp, like Louisiana has all the moss hanging on it. We get moss on trees up here in the Pacific Northwest, but I don't recall them looking quite like that. These are a little different. These just hit different. I'm kind of going rogue. Let's see, go back to my thing. So the ones that are real swoopy like that indicate to me that they're more front facing on that tree. And maybe that's why that works well. And then he has some that kind of go short, and those are the ones that are in the back. That's a cool little approach. Making sure these kind of go off in front of the other tree. We want this one to be so dark because we want it to be in front of this other tree right here. He's got some just like branches and things that are in here like it's broken. And this is a really dark trunk. And that one's going to go straight into the ground in the front side of this little island thing. I feel like that's definitely working. Now he's got these rocks and stuff in here, or whatever those are. I think they're rocks. I'm going to switch to a little bit bigger brush, just a little bit. Still using a small brush. This is a number 2, because we're going to do these rocks right in here. And I want to use that dark color that I was just using. Okay, so I've got these rocks in here. I've got them pretty dark. Whoops! Well, I didn't really show you how I painted those rocks, but don't worry, I'm going to show you right now. They're very simple, solid colored little blobs in the water. There's not really a lot to it. So check this out. I have a painting that I never finished, and I'm going to use this to show you exactly how I would paint those little rocks. So we have our little island that we've painted green, right? And it looks something like that. And then we have this island over here that we've also painted green. Now, we're just going to put some rocks in here. We have a rock like this maybe, and a rock like that. We have a rock over here in the middle. Maybe there's another rock out here. You can decide where you want these rocks and have fun with it. Looks like maybe a rock over there and maybe another rock over there. I've got this back here. This is green, and I've mixed up a really dark color. It's probably not as dark as I want it to be for the sake of this, but you're literally just gonna fill these in 100% solid color. Very dark. You're gonna go over the top of your green little island. Nice flat area on the bottom here. Okay, and then you're just doing that all the way across. That's it. So I put these in here. I want them to be really dark. They're just like silhouettes, essentially. Now we can focus on the reflection and stuff down here that we have. It looks like layers of blue. Then he put some underneath his little rocks. The important thing that I want you to pay attention to is the spacing between the rock and the water. We have our undercoat of blue. When you put this reflection in here, come right up to the rock, but leave a little bit of gap between the rock and the island and all of that stuff. He's got this little tiny rock in here, and if you can see, he has a little bit of a gap there, which tells me there's like a highlight on the edge of this rock. That may have been unintentional, but it works really well. You would want to come in and just leave a hairline gap around that rock. For this reflection, I'm going to use layers of light bluish gray, and we're going to come in here and go right up to the edge here, kind of around up to the edge there and around here, and letting that little white area show through. The reflection in this section is mostly these trees. The reflection here is going to be these rocks. So be careful not to just paint all the way over. I would paint from this rock down like this, because you think of the reflection, if this was mirrored, you would have these angles going like this. This would be the short tree and the bigger tree, right? So it's going to get angled like this and angled like this. Short tree, tall tree, shorter tree. But the general idea is that a mirror image of this would be like that, right? Which is kind of what he's got going on in his picture. He's got these dark areas that get really dark as they go toward the corner. We're going to start off with kind of a light gray, light blue gray, real watered down, really watery. And we're going to kind of come over, leaving that gap and kind of just bringing this down, and then maybe you have some kind of wispy, watery thing happening like that. Okay, where it's the tree. And we're going to do the same thing over here, paying attention to this tree. I just don't want to touch my rock or my island thing. And if you think about the ripples on water, you can kind of be messy with it. And then for these little rocks, we can come in underneath, again, thinking that it's a mirror image. So it would be round and big here and less big there. So we're going like this, not touching the top of the, or the bottom of the rock there. And then same over here. This top part is going to be down here, this tall piece, and this shorter piece over here. So just mirroring. With water, you can play around a lot with ripples by just drawing some very light lines, because the ripples create shadow. One side's picking up the light and the other side is a shadow. He has some kind of cool grasses and things like that. Lots of stuff we can do to kind of add some detail and dimension to these little island things while we're waiting for that water to dry. So I'm gonna get my tiny little liner brush. These liner brushes, unless you have a lot of paint, it's a challenge to get it to be really dark like you want it. I find that pulling it away helps a lot and letting it just kind of barely glide on the paper. And you need a real thin brush for this, for sure. We're gonna do some grasses and things like that up in here. Pulling this all together. So some grasses coming up out of the water, some grass texture there. Got some grasses in here. And I'm really trying to use the flat side of this just a little bit so that I can put a larger section in there. And then I'm using the tip of it now to just kind of put some more grass in here. I'd like to have a little bit more of that darker muted whatever he's got going on, especially up around the tops of these little island things, whatever they are. Throwing some more green in there. Sometimes what I think is fun to do, and let's just try this. I don't think this is what he did. I'm gonna wet my paper right up to the edge, and then we'll get that color and we'll kind of go along the edge and we'll let it drip itself down and see what, let's just see what happens. Put some water in here. Some of this blue, gray. And then I'm gonna go right up to the edge like we've been doing. Let it hit that water, especially where I have these big tall trees. I want there to be a lot right there. And then there's that little tree. And then there's that tree. And then there's this tree. That's a nice little effect. And then from there we can put a few little back and forth kind of strokes. I feel like he's definitely got something going on in here. And he's got a really dark kind of color over in here. I definitely think that maybe it would have been nice to have a little more blue back in here in terms of like separation, almost like there was another island back in there. And that's something we could totally do. You would literally just kind of come across here like this. And then I would clean my brush out. And from this top edge, I would pull it up into there and just kind of soften that up. In hindsight, what I would have or should have done is to establish that shoreline in the beginning. But this was an afterthought. And it's totally okay the way that I did that. But what you can also do is, let's say this is your shoreline that you have in there. And here are your islands. And you have a rock out here in the middle. And you have another island over here, right? So if this is my shoreline out here, what I would do is I would actually get my paper wet just right above this line, okay? And we have our trees up here that have the fog. So if I get my paper wet right above this line, and it should be nice and wet, not just kind of wet, it should be wet, going up towards my trees that I had up there. And then what I want to do is I want to get that blue-gray so that it matches the color of the trees in that area, right? So I've got my blue-gray on my brush, and I'm just going to draw a nice line. I want it to be nice and crisp on this edge down here, and I want it to fade and have the water pull the paint this direction. So I'm going to draw this line, and you'll see that water start to pull that paint. Okay, so then I'm going to just kind of start to put some of that paint in here, and it's really pulling it nicely. But I'm keeping that nice sharp edge down here, and that is where the water starts. We want that to be nice and crisp for this particular effect. The way that he's got it done, it looks like there's just fog everywhere. But because we have that orange reflecting into the water here and also here, I wanted to add some definition and divide that space in half. Now you can tip your paper just a little bit and kind of watch that paint move and go around. I'm just dabbing a couple more spots in here. I can also grab some more paint if I want some areas to be darker. And then something fun that you can also do if you feel like this is going in kind of a weird direction or you want it to be just a little bit smoother, you can get a paper towel, just kind of bunch it up in one area. I would caution you against putting your fingertip in it like this, because what happens is when you push that down, it's going to damage your paper and the paint will absorb in that area in more of a circular section. And we don't really want to do that. We just want to use this to kind of gently manipulate the paint and move it in certain directions. So I can sweep this just a little bit and start to establish a little bit more of a direction for this mist or this fog that is kind of down here on the bottom. So you can do that with all sorts of, different applications or techniques that you're trying to do, but just kind of moving that around just a little bit and softening some of those edges just a little bit. Okay. And I can continue to tip it. I also want to make sure that I don't have an edge here. So if you're starting to see that you have, color in your water just along an edge, like where you put your paint, we don't want that. It's going to dry like that and create a really sharp line. So this is another application for your paper towel. Just use that to gently dab and pick that water up a little bit so that you don't have a visible line. We want it to blend softly. Okay, that helps separate that out a little bit. I'm actually gonna put a little bit more in here. This is where it's important to figure that out ahead of time. But is it working? Yes, totally. But that would have been nice to sort of plan out. But that's why I'm doing it on this smaller piece of paper. So I can go and say, okay, I really liked this. This didn't work well. This worked great. Now we're really starting to get this reflection here and having that make more sense. It worked really well in what he did because there wasn't that reflection of the orange, and he didn't have that, and it went behind the mountain. For me, it's really coming through here because I put so much of it right there. It would have been nice for it to go behind that mountain a little bit more, so it doesn't look like the mountain's just on fire or something. But then when I had it reflecting here, I felt like it didn't make a lot of sense without this kind of island thing back in there. And so now that's really working. The other thing we want to do is really put some more definition, I think, for these trees, which is really what he did also. So if I just come back in here and, kind of put some rough definition in here of there's some ripples and, something's kind of happening, I think that's all we really need to do. Same thing over here. Just kind of putting the idea of some darker things that are on this island kind of being reflected into the water. Let's take the tape off and see what it looks like. Not too shabby. Thanks for hanging out.